we go inside the red pyramid of Dashur. And these are some old pictures. Here on the left, this is during the modern restoration process, where you can literally see the fluid dynamic patterns here in the lower portion of the chamber. So in the lower part of the chamber, you're looking at the southeastern corner here. And there appears to be a wave pattern crashing into this southeastern corner. And then it flows around the lower portion of the chamber into the northwestern corner. And we've actually done a series of demonstrations where we got a tub that is the same dimensions of the lower part of the chamber, and we put the inlet shaft where we think the inlet shaft was, and pumped water into this container, and it produces that exact same wave pattern in the lower portion of the chamber. And then if you look into the upper portion of the chamber, the staining gets incredibly dark and nebulous. It gets darker and darker and darker the further you get into the upper portion of the chamber. And you can see it's moving from the upper portion of the chamber down in through this connecting shaft. And there's a flow pattern that moves from the upper vault through the connecting shaft into the secondary chamber. And you can still see this stuff today. But these pictures are before they installed the modern wooden floor. And they've also gone in here and cleaned these structures. And all of these structures have been renovated and cleaned and, sanitized for the public, where they've removed as many indications of the original function as possible. So again,
that's going to make quite a story someday in the archaeological textbooks of what not to do.
Oh, and I have some new chemical analyses that are coming up on the channel over the next 2 weeks that are really going to blow the lid off of what was really found inside of these structures and what it was capable of doing. So again, you were asking me, how did I know that this was chemistry? I immediately knew that I was looking at flow patterns.
So again, what do you make of okay, so you have this connecting chamber, right? So there's a door that's at the bottom right of the left picture. And so if you were pouring liquid into this space, you would expect that the liquid would run through that conduit. And so how do you have the secondary flow that's coming from the top? You think that it's like some kind of like distillation column where it accumulated there and then would like leak through into the conduit?
Very good question. So the first step in the process is filling the lower portion of the chamber so that connecting shaft is filled with water. And what this does is it isolates the remaining space in each reaction chamber, because there's no air that's going to move through there if that connecting shaft is filled with water. This also sets the initial pressure conditions inside of the chamber. So now we're going to go back to Physics 101. If you take a gas that is in a square container, for example, and you cut the volume in half, what have you done? You've increased the pressure and increased temperature, because those molecules are going to be colliding even more. They're under much higher pressure. So if you take a water-insoluble gas, you can use water as a plunger mechanism to force that water-insoluble gas into the upper portions of the chamber. And this chamber is designed with progressively reduced volume. So the further you push the gas up into the chamber, the higher the temperature gets and the higher the pressure becomes. And there are many, many other mechanisms of operation that are involved in increasing the temperature and pressure. And I'm also going to show evidence of a catalytic coating and sealing compound that was discovered. Again, I knew that this staining was not from bats. I knew that it was chemicals. And fast forward 6 years, we now have samples that were taken of this staining material, and it's filled with the exact same metals that we use today as the catalyst in the Haber process, specifically iron oxide and aluminum oxide, which is coating these chambers. And then this is the secondary chamber here. So this one on the left is the primary reaction chamber. The one on the right is the secondary chamber. And this is before, because now there's a modern staircase that's built right here that covers this entire wall up. And there's no way that you can tell me that this staining is from bats. And I knew as soon as I started hearing the conventional, because again, the keepers of the sites are the ones that tell you, oh, it's from the bats. Pay no attention to the chemical stains or the smell of ammonia. It's from the bats. And I have been in plenty of other structures, specifically Mastaba 17 at the Pyramid of My Doom, which is a very small underground chamber that's filled with bats. And I went down in there to film a video specifically to show that there is zero staining on the walls. There's a bunch of bat poop on the floor, but there is no staining on the walls, and it does not smell like ammonia in there. And there's almost zero airflow. You have to go through this underground tunnel, crawl on your hands and knees through a tunnel that's maybe 2 feet by 2 feet to get inside of this thing. And it's filled with bats, and there's no staining on the walls and no smell of ammonia. So we've done
bat poop kind of smells like gunpowder or something. It's a very particular smell, right?
So it does. It's guano, and again, if this was something organic like urine or feces of some sort, it would have a very organic decomposition smell because it's been in there forever. This smells like pure ammonia. Like if you were to take a jug of ammonia from underneath your sink, open it up, and take a whiff of it, it will make you dizzy. I've spent
smelling salts.
Oh yeah, no, exactly. Ammonium chloride, or whatever they use for smelling. So I'm pretty sure it's ammonium chloride. It'll get your brain fired up real quick. And I've spent so much time inside of that final chamber that I've had trouble getting down the stairs because I get so it'll get your head spin if you spend enough time in there. Which I've spent hours inside of this structure looking at this staining and trying to understand what was better going on inside of the structure. And again, so I get this, I see the chemical staining, I can smell the ammonia, I can see the flow patterns. And then
maybe it's a good idea to just orient us to the Haber Bosch process, or just give an overview of how this works so that we can map it onto the structure better.
Boom. Ask and you shall receive, sir. So this here on the left is the first apparatus that was designed by Fritz Haber to manufacture ammonia. And I did some investigation into the life of old Fritz Haber, and it turns out that he was a big fan of Egypt. And he used to come here on his vacations with his wife. He spent a ton of time in Egypt. And of course, these guys had access into these pyramids. So I would propose that old Fritz Haber had the exact same experience that I did inside of the Red Pyramid. He goes inside there, he sees the chemical staining. He was a chemist. He was a chemical engineer. He was the first person that went inside of these structures with our modern knowledge of manufacturing chemicals. And if you look at the configuration of this apparatus.
Yeah, can you just describe it for people? What's going on there?
Yeah, so these are three metal chambers. And the first two chambers are the exact same size. And they are at the same level in the apparatus. And there's
the same height,
shaft. There's an inlet shaft that goes into the first chamber. The first chamber is connected by a connecting tube into the second chamber. And then the third chamber is larger than the second two. And he put it on an elevated platform. So it's a little bit higher in the structure or in the apparatus than the other two chambers, which are essentially at quote unquote ground level. And then if you look over here at the right, at the configuration of the Red Pyramid, it's the exact same configuration where your first and second reaction chamber are the same size. They're both at ground level, connected with a connected tube, and your third and final synthesis chamber is elevated above the other two, and it's significantly larger than the first two.
Okay, so why that configuration?
I believe he did it as an homage to the place from whence it came. He could have designed this apparatus with any sort of permutation of sizes of chambers. But I really do think that this was intended to give credit to the place where it was discovered, which is the Red Pyramid of Dashur.